Welcome to the show. Well, tonight, I said last night, the latest book by fake Aborigine Bruce Pascoe with more fake claims was the ABC's big chance to prove at last it was in the truth business. Well, today the ABC gave Pascoe at least 3 interviews to promote his book. Did it once challenge him on his falsehoods? Did his journalists this time act as journalists and not propagandists? The results later in the show. Also tonight, China's aggression exposed, not just its attack on a Philippine ship, but a massive hacking operation by a Chinese government agency against the US, Britain and New Zealand. And now a new Chinese push on the Antarctic to our south. Are we awake to the danger? But first, 2 signs today of the Albanese government's most ideological ministers smashed by reality. Let's start with the humiliation of Climate Change and Energy Minister Chris Bowen at his own press conference by a guy he actually invited along to back him up. What a clown show. Bowen has a mad obsession with slashing our emissions at a terrible cost to pretend to stop what is, in my opinion, a pretend climate crisis. Now, part of that plan is something the opposition calls a ute tax. It's a plan to force through new emissions standards to essentially fine car makers from next year if they sell too many petrol cars here that are gassy, and then this emission standard is ratcheted up every year. Now, the problem here is, well, it's obvious. Our most popular cars are SUVs and utes, cheap workhorses, when electric alternatives cost much, much more and perform much, much worse. Less range, less towing ability. So Chris Bowen was today forced, reportedly by the Prime Minister, to slow up a bit with this attack on these utes and SUVs and come to sort of a compromise, which Transport Minister Madeleine King today announced. Alongside Bowen, they'd reclassify these 4-wheel drives so they wouldn't be hit as hard by these new standards.
A limited number of 4-wheel drives, such as the Toyota Land Cruiser, great vehicle, Ford Everest, also a great vehicle regarded as a workhorse 4-wheel drives, will move from the passenger car into the light commercial. The standard itself will begin on the 1st of January 2025, but the credits and penalties system won't start until the 1st of July next year.
Okay, that's the boring details. Now, Bowen tried hard to sell this compromise as if it was a really good thing for us instead of actually a big cost.
This legislation will mean Australian motorists are no longer at the back of the queue, no longer treated as second-class citizens, but are given the same rights as those motorists and consumers in 85% of the world's car markets.
But then came the moment of humiliation. Now, Bowen and King has invited all these big car bosses along to make it seem that if, big car makers back this deal, then it must be good for you as well, right? Wrong. The boss of Toyota Australia was then asked the basic question: would Labor's plan mean Australians could still buy cars like the most popular ones today that were just as cheap and perform just as well? Oh dear.
Do you feel you'll be able to, in terms of continuity, still offer Toyota customers vehicles in terms of the Hilux and so forth that'll have the same capability and range as the current model as you transition through this for the same price, or do you think one of those will have to give?
That's our aim, to actually work our way through this, and as I said, it will be difficult. So the technology is yet to actually be at an affordable price, also providing fit for purpose at this very second.
Yeah, well, you heard him. They don't have the technology yet. It'll be very difficult, he said elsewhere, to get cars under Labor's plans that perform like the ones you can buy now at the price you pay now. So whether it's next year or the year after, you will still pay for Labor's plan. And to the other Labor retreat today, the little smack. The High Court will next month rule on another case that could force the government to release even more immigration detainees, including foreign criminals, this time those who refuse to go home and can't be forced to. So today, Immigration Minister Andrew Giles rushed in new legislation at the very last minute, given that Parliament's about to stop for 6 weeks after tomorrow, to create a new crime ahead of that decision: the crime of refusing to cooperate with being sent home. And the penalty, up to 5 years jail. Now, these new laws would also give the Immigration Minister the power to say to countries that refuse to take back citizens who don't want to be sent back, and that's particularly Iran, that they will be punished. None of their citizens will be allowed to come here on a visa, unless, they've got close family here or something like that. Now, maybe this is going to work. But why this rush and this secrecy? Now, the government didn't show the opposition this legislation until this morning, although it had printed the documents on Friday.
Did the minister come to us and say, OK, we want to give you this legislation so that you can look at it over the weekend, so that you can make sure there's no unintended consequences? No, he did not. He sat on it over the weekend. He sat on it yesterday and then presented it to us today.
Now, the opposition did force the government to at least agree to a 2-hour inquiry tonight, 2 hours, into the legislation ahead of the final Senate vote tomorrow. Now, neither side really wants to seem weak on our borders. A lot about politics here. But, I'm uneasy. This legislation, for instance, could let the minister force someone who really did have a genuine fear of persecution to cooperate in getting sent back to where they came from. Now, shouldn't this need more than a couple of hours of investigation, a bit more debate? But I tell you, this government now is in a panic. I need to get back to Chris Bowen, the Energy Minister. This is a man, I've said it before, who cannot hear the truth, even when it's told to him by the man he invited, the truth that might contradict his big green dream. You listen to this.
Can the Minister confirm that even after the Prime Minister's personal intervention to fix the mess of Labor's new family car and ute tax, families buying one of Australia's most popular vehicles, the Toyota Land Cruiser, will still be facing a tax, making it more than $10,000 more expensive than it is today?
The Chief Executive of Toyota just was at a press conference with me and the Minister for Transport, explicitly disagreeing with the premise just put by the Honourable Member for New England.
Well, actually, the Toyota boss did not disagree, really. He actually said, standing right next to Bowen, that it would be difficult under Bowen's plans to have cars as cheap and useful as the petrol ones he sells today. Just hear it again.
That does leave a challenge, a significant challenge. Will be difficult. The technology is yet to actually be at an affordable price, also providing fit for purpose at this very second.
Joining me is National Senator Matt Canavan, the former Resources Minister and our Tuesday regular. Matt, what's happened to your head? The question time must have been a bit unruly today.
It's a blood sport down here. Touch footy this morning, had a bit of a run-of-the-mill head clash, and well, we haven't seen this much blood in the party room since Malcolm Turnbull left this building, but I'm still fighting fit and ready to go, ready to get stuck in.
Who's the villain?
I'll out him, Graham Perrott from the Labor Party, mate. He plays it pretty hard on the touch field.
Graham Perrott.
Wasn't really a headbutt. It was just a clash of heads, and these things happen. We'll get back on the footy field next time. I'll get him back next time.
No, well, the answer there is you should see the other guy. But Matt, the plan that Chris Bowen unveiled today, 4-wheel drives reclassified as light commercial vehicles so they aren't hit as hard by the vehicle emission standards this government's going to impose from next year. What does that actually mean for car buyers?
Well, let's go through the numbers. Let's go through the actual numbers here. A Land Cruiser Prado at the moment emits 208 grams of carbon dioxide, that evil thing, carbon dioxide a kilometre. Under the government's previous plans that they announced a few months ago, that car was classified as a passenger vehicle. It would have to reduce its emissions per kilometre to 76, so by 132 grams per kilometre would have to be reduced. If it didn't do that, if it couldn't do that, it has to pay $100 a gram. And so if it stayed at 208, that's a potentially extra $13,200 on the cost of your Land Cruiser. So that's where those numbers come from that Barnaby was quoting. Now, today, the Energy Minister and the government has backflipped. They backed down. The Prime Minister has had to intervene, embarrassingly, for Chris Bowen. And they're saying we're going to reclassify the Land Cruiser Prado as instead a light commercial vehicle. Well, if they do that, guess what? The emissions have to go down to, well, 82 grams per kilometre. So a 6 gram difference. And at $100 a gram, that's a saving of $600 for you and your family. Won't you be so thankful to Chris? Now, it is true, Chris also announced today a number of other very detailed changes, that he's going to change something technical called the breakpoint in the formula. He's possibly going to make it a bit slower at the start, but a bit more steeper at the end, still potentially getting those reductions I went through. But he hasn't released any of the detail. So once again, this government, they've done everything in secret. They haven't taken you, the taxpayer, into their confidence. They've tried to negotiate these backroom deals here with the motoring companies. They've obviously been forced out like hostages to the press today to try and announce this deal. But we still don't have all the details on this. And it's completely, the government is treating the people with contempt. And we deserve to know what is in this deal, what are the details, release them ASAP.
Isn't it strange that the Toyota boss was saying right next to Chris Bowen, listen, we haven't got the technology at the moment. It's going to be very, very difficult to actually provide vehicles that'll be this cheap and work this well, that meet these emission standards. And Chris Bowen goes into Parliament House and says, oh, no, not a problem with prices rising. That's a con. I mean, what does it take to tell this guy, hey, your plans aren't working?
Well, what Chris Bowen wants it to take is for you to buy and change your buying practices and buy a EV. That's his solution to all this, because when he constantly tells you that actually this is going to save you money, the fine print there is it will only save you money if you buy the car that Chris Bowen prefers. And I don't think our government, your government, any minister, whether it's Chris Bowen or anyone else, should be telling Australian people what car you should buy. It should be a free choice for all Australians. If you want to buy an electric car, good luck to you. They have high depreciation costs that the government doesn't factor in their calculations. But if you want to bear those costs, good luck to you. Go for it. It's your money. But if you want to buy, and you sometimes, in fact, need to buy a petrol car, a diesel car, to do your job, to go about your livelihood, to take around a big family, you should not face punishing taxes from the government that seek to force you, to punish you for exercising your free will and your free decision in what was previously a free country. And that's why people are arcing up about this.
Let alone drive on that wild...
intervened.
Yeah, but let alone the freedom to drive in this wide brown land, something that's going to be very difficult in your electric car. Matt Canavan, thank you so much. Good luck with the healing process. Thank you very much for your time. What a man, goes through anything to come and bring the news to you. But speaking of news, some breaking news out of the United States and amazing pictures. We've had a ship, or they've had a ship, a cargo ship in Baltimore Harbour. What it was doing, heaven knows, hit a pylon of a bridge and caused the whole thing, a 3 kilometre long Francis Scott Key bridge, to fall in the water. This is about 1:30 a.m. local time. So thankfully, there weren't all that many cars there, but plenty enough. 7 construction workers and 3 or 4 civilian vehicles may have been on the bridge when it collapsed. And a rescue operation is underway. Unbelievable pictures. There'll be more about that, obviously, later on Sky News. Now, the Albanese government's compromise of petrol cars. Look, it's just one more sign that its plan to cut emissions are running way, way behind. Because this is another compromise, right? One huge problem is that all over the country, locals are revolting against having the countryside ruined by all the huge solar farms and huge wind turbines, and a quarter of a kilometre tall, mind you, and monstrous transmission lines marching over the land. 28,000 kilometres of these transmission lines are planned. This is all Chris Bowen's big plan. For instance, here's the front page of the Warrnambool Standard in Victoria yesterday. 200 locals outraged by Bowen's plan to stick the wind towers off their coast. Now, it's because of all these protests that they're everywhere that the Victorian government has announced a change. It's going to cut the right of locals to complain to the Civil and Administrative Tribunal. And it will instead give the minister the right to ram these wind and solar farms right down the locals' necks in just 4 months. Now, if they complain, they have to mount an expensive appeal to the Supreme Court, and only then, on a point of law, that's it. You can't say, look, what are you doing to my countryside? Now, the first project that could be forced through like that is a massive solar farm, 800 hectares, that's planned for smack bang in the Heathcote wine region in central Victoria, which is great agricultural land. This has outraged local wine producers. They've formed the Colbinaban Renewable Action Group, which represents about 60 businesses, farmers and residents. The spokesman is John Davies, who joins me now. John, thanks for your time. What's wrong with a big solar farm in your area?
Well, Andrew, there's no problem with a solar farm in our area, but as the Victorian Farmers Federation identifies, only 4% of Australia's land mass is arable. And this massive solar plant is going to be smack in the middle of land that is identified by the Campaspe Shire as strategically important for agriculture. And so, yep, fine, put it on marginal land, but don't put it on the best land that we have.
It's a weird way of using great farming land. There's been estimates, some amazing estimates of just how much farming land will be sacrificed to wind and solar farms. But here's the thing. Here is this prime land going for a solar farm, but your right to object is being taken away from you by the Labor government, isn't it?
That's correct, Andrew. But let's just peel back the onion a bit on what's defined as farming land. This is way, way, way more important than just merely flat land, grazing land. In 1990, this specific region, the Mount Camel Range, with its ancient Cambrian soil, was identified by Wine Australia as being one of the best locations for growing high-quality wine grapes. Now, it could be used for horticulture or any type of intensive farming. The soils are unique. And when you think about the contribution to Victoria's state domestic product, the highest contributor is food and fabric. Now, rural families are the essence of rural communities. Farmers actually make up exactly what goes on and is valued by residents in the country. And to have a massive solar farm right in the middle of this highly productive land is just a dereliction of duty of government.
Look, it seems to me really a crime, not just on the landscape, but absolutely the best use of the land. I don't know how this could happen, but again, just come back to that point. You can complain all you like. I mean, complain here, complain in the papers, complain, but you cannot now, it seems, have a legal opportunity to stop it unless you go to the Supreme Court, and only then on a point of law.
Yep, you're 100% right, Andrew. But I think it's even worse than that. You mentioned VCAT before. VCAT is an important appeal process for any people that feel disenfranchised with government decisions. It operates independent of government and its decisions are binding. This calling in process that's been enacted by the Victorian Labor government means that any objection we have, it goes to an appeal panel. Now, the appeal panel is appointed by the minister, and the minister doesn't have to follow the recommendations of the appeal panel. So this is a decision of one person and one person alone, with no appeal process. You mentioned
it's a
point of law to the Supreme Court. Well, good luck with that.
John, it's a fix, and all you can do is put political heat on the government. It's just outrageous. And by the way, green industry people are trying to force the New South Wales government to do something similar there because they're way behind. People don't want what they're doing, but they want to just keep you quiet and force it on you. John Davies, all strength to your struggle. Thank you so
Andrew,
much for your time.
One final comment, if I could.
Yep.
Andrew, one final comment.
Quick. Yes.
This is actually a political process, and so the state government is way behind on their renewables targets, and they're going to push a lot of these projects through, and the compromise will be rural communities. And I think
absolutely
it's
coming to
inappropriate
your
abuse
town
of power.
next. It is so undemocratic, and really appreciate you exposing this. Thanks again. After the break, China's dictatorship is exposed, hacking gangs stealing politicians' secrets in 3 continents. But are we awake to what it's also now up to in a 4th continent to our south in Antarctica? I misnamed the Transport Minister earlier. Sorry about that. It's, of course, Catherine King. China's Foreign Minister, Wang Yi, came here last week, you remember that, to pretend the dictatorship just wanted peace and friendship with us. What a con. Because meanwhile, Chinese warships attacked the Philippines supply vessel in waters claimed by the Philippines, but which China wants. People injured there in that attack. And now the US has put out arrest warrants for 7 Chinese hackers, it says, are linked to the Chinese government and have attacked dissidents, critics and government officials in the US. Britain's Deputy Prime Minister said that also attacked Britain as well.
That is why the United Kingdom has today sanctioned 2 individuals and 1 entity associated with the Chinese state-affiliated APT-31 group for involvement in malicious cyber activity targeting officials, government entities and parliamentarians around the world.
China today said China had also, New Zealand today said China had also hacked government services there. And China in the past has also hacked into our own parliament. I mean, it's unbelievable. And now there's something else. Elizabeth Buchanan, she's an academic at America's West Point Military Academy, also a senior fellow at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. She's written a piece saying that China is also manoeuvring to get more control over Antarctica, despite international treaties that ban countries from mineral exploitation or military use of that continent. It's built a network of stations over Antarctica. We've got a share of that continent as well and got a couple stations ourselves, supposedly just for research, it says. And last month opened its 5th one, which is very big and got dual use capabilities, both civilian and military, in a region that's perfect for, among other things, communications with satellites in space. Joining me is John Blaxland, is a former senior military intelligence officer, now Professor of International Security and Intelligence Studies at the Australian National University. Professor John Blaxland, thank you so much indeed for your time. You've got China under attack now from America, Britain, New Zealand. They're all now today complaining about hacking by people associated with a Chinese government facility. How big a concern is China? The aggression here, the shamelessness really is quite extraordinary.
So I think what we're facing is what I describe as unrestricted competition. And it echoes the title of a book by 2 Chinese colonels about 20 years ago who wrote Unrestricted Warfare, talking about media, legal and psychological warfare. We in the English language have an issue with the word warfare because we have a binary of war and peace. But for the Chinese, it seems there's more of a continuum that I think is better captured in the word competition for us, because that's what we're in. We're in a serious competition, competition for influence, competition for the minds of our kids, competition for economic dominance, and for influence in terms of our political preferences and our alliance ties.
You see that now. The Australian Strategic Policy Institute, for instance, just did a paper warning that, or one of their scholars did a paper recently warning about Chinese competition even for Antarctica, that's suggesting that they're just building a big new base there. And they've got their eye on potentially resources, military technology, et cetera, et cetera. The competition really is in our face, isn't it?
Yeah, and competition over Antarctica is growing. We've got several Chinese bases on Australian Antarctic territory. We've done that with, in my view, a certain degree of naivety about what's happening, particularly because of Chinese ability to launch, what we're now seeing, almost saturation, low Earth orbit, polar orbit satellite coverage of the Australian maritime zones. And this has made it's one of the reasons why we need to get nuclear propulsion submarines. Our diesel electrics are now subject to being picked out of the water when they come up to surface to recharge their batteries. The wake of that snorkel surfacing is now detectable, and with almost saturation coverage, coupled with AI and drones, they're basically, you can pick them out of the water, and that means that you've got to avoid that. You've got to stay underwater. So, but let's go back to Antarctica for a minute. We have taken a very simple view, in my view, towards the competition in Antarctica. China is looking at this with the long game in mind. We can barely agree on building a runway. We've decided not to build a runway when it's clearly in our interests to do so, in my view. And we face the prospect of more competition and that use of Antarctica by, so-called scientific purposes by others, I think is seriously questionable.
Now, just wonder, just finally, Chinese foreign minister, and it's also on the Politburo, which is even more important, Wang Yi visited Australia last week, made a big fuss. He made a very public 1 hour meeting with former Prime Minister Paul Keating because Paul Keating is a real lapdog of the Chinese line. He parrots all their lines, the most ferocious defender of communist China. It seems to have got right up the nose of the government, quite naturally. And it was interesting that Penny Wong, our foreign minister, then came out of the meeting, her meeting with Wang Yi, listing all the grievances that she'd raised with him, things like, anti-democratic, all that kind of stuff. It seems to me that visit backfired, that this was very poor diplomacy by China, and shocked the government into confronting it in language I haven't seen since the election.
So it's interesting. There's a real reluctance from Chinese officials to let go of the wolf warrior diplomacy. I think that it comes with a certain sense of entitlement, a sense of confidence, a sense of we're big, you're small, learn your place. That is not very. It doesn't go down well in egalitarian Australia. And it's generated some pushback. So it actually might give the government a bit of breathing space, because Penny Wong as foreign minister and Albanese as the prime minister have faced a little bit of pressure from the left about being too pro-AUKUS, being too sympathetic to the United States, not critical enough. And I think, seeing the Chinese foreign minister at work, I think maybe even gives them a bit more confidence that they are on the right track, that AUKUS is right, and that respectful but polite and firm pushback is in fact completely appropriate for Australia as it engages with China.
John Blaxland, thank you so much for your time.
Good to be with you, Andrew.
After the break, a big win for Donald Trump too, in fact. His Democrat enemies tried to bankrupt him with legal moves, but instead just doubled his wealth. How we laughed. Donald Trump has just had a big win in court. He stopped Democrat prosecutors from grabbing more than, or nearly $500 million American from him and crippling his finances ahead of America's presidential election in November. A Democrat judge had ordered Trump, the Republican candidate, to pay that extraordinary fine, nearly $500 million US, by yesterday, ahead of even Trump's appeal in a decision that actually stinks of partisan politics. Now, this was a fine for Trump allegedly inflating the valuation of his assets when asking banks for a loan, which he actually repaid in full. Trump said there was no way he could find that much money that fast. And now an appeals court has more than halved the amount Trump must pay ahead of his appeal to just $175 million US, or in Australian money, 270. And it's given him another 10 days to find that.
I greatly respect the decision of the appellate division, and I'll post either $175 million in cash or bonds or security or whatever is necessary very quickly within the 10 days. And I thank the appellate division for acting quickly. But Judge Engoron is a disgrace to this country, and this should not be allowed to happen.
Joining me is Sean Spicer, the first White House spokesman when Donald Trump was president. Sean Spicer, thank you so much for your time. This is an important win for Donald Trump.
Well, it is. I mean, not too many people carrying around $500 million in cash. I think people have to recognize. I've had a lot of people in the States saying, "Oh, if he's so rich, what's the big deal?" And I'm like, how many people are rich by keeping cash liquid? I mean, you don't stay liquid. You invest it in some place, real estate, bonds, stock. If someone asks for it, you got to sell off a bunch of stuff. And I think while he was on appeal, he didn't want to liquidate, any of the above, property, stocks, bonds, whatever else, because that once you do that, it's going to be devalued. So he recognizes the importance of it, number one. Number two, it's an absurd amount of money for a victimless crime. There is no one who got hurt in this. Banks loaned him money based on an application that he made that they deemed fair. They all got paid back. They're very happy with the money that they got in return, the interest that they got paid. But somehow the state of New York, years later, decides that they need to right this just egregious wrong that no one else saw fit to do, and that no one else in the entire state of New York must be guilty of. You think with all of the things happening in New York, the attorney general there would have a few other things to deal with, but no, going after Donald Trump for something that happened years ago that was completely paid back with satisfied customers, that's where she wants to spend her time.
It's just so extraordinary, Sean. Now, he still faces a massive fine, but for his critics, his haters, joke on this. In the meantime, he's up for an even bigger payday with his new social media platform, Truth Social.
Yeah, I mean, look, the initial public offering has this thing valued now, and I'm not good with the exchange rate over there, but now it started off at $3 billion. They're saying upwards of $4 billion US dollars in the US now, and if he holds on to it, I guess there's some additional bonuses. That's a lot to be able to leverage going forward. It's a huge windfall. Forbes actually already came out and moved up his ranking among the world's richest people just on that alone. So he's going to have plenty of cash now to leverage, whether it's a fine or anything else. But he pretty much doubled his wealth in the course of a few hours here.
That will really make his haters choke. I mean, the Democrats were thinking to punish him, knock him out of the race, bankrupt him, do anything, and he suddenly is richer than ever. What a joke.
Andrew, think about this for a second. They came at us. I was on the 2016 campaign. They came at us with everything they had on the Russia hoax and trying to undermine that. Then they did the Hunter Biden laptop. This time they said, we're going all out. We're going to throw the kitchen sink at him. We're going to try to take him off the ballot. We're going to come at him criminally, and then we're also going to try to bankrupt him. The ballot thing has failed. He has to be listed on the ballot. They failed on that. So far, the criminal cases don't seem to be working in their favor. And lastly, this idea of bleeding him out, we'll see where this thing ends up. But this victory today in court among the appellate court. Now, remember, these folks on the appellate court, they're not Trump fans by any means either. They're still big Democrats. That just shows you how absurd the lower court ruling was, though.
It sure does. Sean, meanwhile, though, Trump does face these various criminal trials, all launched by Democrat prosecutors. A judge in one of them, and this is the only one that looks like going ahead before the election, has refused to delay the trial for Trump allegedly paying hush money to stripper Stormy Daniels over an alleged affair. And so that's going to go ahead now next month. What is the danger here for Donald Trump?
Well, first of all, let me just back up a second for the viewers to understand this, that this in New York is considered a bookkeeping issue, how he was paying somebody off with the company. Normally, it would be a misdemeanor charge. It would have passed what we have called the statute of limitations, meaning if you don't charge a crime within a certain amount of time, it goes away. You can't go back in time and charge something for happened 10, 15 years ago. It had already passed, but the DA there, Alvin Bragg, combined a bunch of, it's almost like he made his own little recipe of concoctions, trumped it up to a felony, and then retroactively charged him with it. So on its face, it doesn't actually pass the smell test. Nobody else would ever get charged with this. This was specifically to target Trump. And so that being said, why was it delayed? To further make sure everyone understands this, because one of the star witnesses for the defense was Michael Cohen, who used to work for Trump. The Southern District of New York had withheld thousands and thousands of documents that they had pertaining to Michael Cohen, testimony, recordings, et cetera, that they withheld from Trump's team. You cannot do that in a court. That's part of what they call discovery. And the judge said, well, I'll give you a few days now to look over these thousands and thousands of pages of documents against somebody who's going to be testifying against you. But they're going to proceed on April 15th. To get to your question, Andrew, it's never a good thing to be in court and to face charges. I mean, the idea of him actually facing anything substantial, I think even his biggest haters would admit is unlikely. But I would never want to be in court. I would never want to face any charges. It doesn't help with the narrative. Most people in America don't follow things below the headlines. So for a lot of people, they're just they might see a headline because it's New York City. Let's face it. It's not a favorable jury that would say Trump convicted of X, fill in the blank. That never looks good if you're running for office, but I don't think it'll be anything substantial.
No, but it'll be embarrassing, particularly if he's trying to appeal to religious groups, etc. It'll be most embarrassing. But yeah, look, they're trying everything to knock him out before the ballot, and so far he's still standing. And what doesn't kill you, Sean, makes you stronger.
Look, I'm telling you, Andrew, you're right, though. This is a guy who has only grown stronger the more they throw at him. And I think they're ruining, they thought they had this foolproof plan to come at him on a multi-pronged effort, and it's done nothing but take people who might not otherwise support Trump and say, you know what, they really are trying to get him, and I'm going to be with them now.
I think that's absolutely right. Sean Spicer, thanks for your time.
You bet, Andrew.
After the break, the panel on a curious decision by the Albanese government to go soft on Iran's terrorist arm. Plus, I set the test for the ABC last night. Would it hold fake Aborigine Bruce Pascoe to account for his untruths as he sells his new book? I checked 3 ABC interviews this morning that Pascoe did, and I will give you the results after this. I think you'll laugh. The fake Aborigine Bruce Pascoe today went on a publicity blitz on the ABC to sell his new book about his farm near Malakuta. And what a circus. Now, I said last night that this new book was the ABC's chance to finally prove they were in the truth business. Will the ABC finally admit that Pascoe is not Aboriginal? His available genealogical records show that all his ancestors are actually of British descent. Would the ABC challenge Pascoe's latest and obviously fake claim that Aborigines lived here for 100,000 years, which is twice as long as the best science actually suggests? And would the ABC challenge Pascoe's new claim that the way to help Aborigines was to buy Aboriginal food from them, specifically flour from kangaroo grass? Although I showed last night there was such low yield stuff that just 250 grams of kangaroo grass flour from Pascoe's farm cost $90 or $360 a kilo, when a kilo of wheat flour costs just $1.40. Well, here's what happened at those 3 ABC interviews. Not one ABC journalist dared to ask Pascoe for evidence he was Aboriginal or call him out as a fraud. Instead, they just asked how hard it must have been to be outed by nasty me. Here's the ABC's breakfast show on TV, followed by ABC Melbourne Radio's Raphael Epstein.
Are you expecting to face some criticism still, and how do you deal with that?
Oh, look, I'm certain there'll be the same kind of attack from the same kind of people.
Bruce, I'm going to start with the hardest part, maybe. There's a few times in the book you've had a lot of the edges knocked off you. That's what it sounds like.
Mm. Yeah, look, maybe I'm just getting old. Maybe that your psyche changes as you age. And but yeah, I found it wearing, particularly because we're working so hard, and to go down to the post office and have your mate tell you what's in the newspaper that day about your honesty. I found that hard.
And that's it. The ABC's Radio National Breakfast even advertised Pascoe still as Aboriginal on its webpage, a member of no less than 3 tribes, and also didn't dare ask in the interview if that was actually true. What's more, not one of the three ABC interviewers noted Pascoe's own kangaroo grass flour sold at an astonishing $360 a kilo. And the closest then he got to scepticism about his grand plan to save Aborigines by buying their flour was this question on just one show, at least noting the low yields of these grasses, but then letting Pascoe wave it away as a non sequitur.
Realistically, can the yield of native plants and vegetables, I guess, be enough for large-scale production?
Of course, the yield is slightly lower, and we're looking to buy another machine which will double our output.
And, of course, not one interviewer challenged Pascoe's claim that Aborigines were here for 100,000 years. In fact, Pascoe today upped that by adding another 20,000 years to that, quoting some bloke he knew in Warrnambool.
He suspects Aboriginal people had cooking fires there 100,000 to 120,000 years ago.
As I said last night, when it comes to Aboriginal history on the ABC, truth is dead. But to the panel, Shadow Assistant Foreign Minister Claire Chandler and Will Kingston, host of Australiana, a weekly podcast from The Spectator on politics and culture. Look, that's probably enough about Pascoe, but Will, just quickly, just to you, why would not one ABC interviewer ask Pascoe directly about what they clearly know, that there's evidence out there that is not Aboriginal at all, is a fraud?
I'll give you three reasons, Andrew. Number one, the quality of investigative journalism in Australia is generally woeful, and it's non-existent at the ABC unless it's a topic that a left-wing journalist from Ultimo cares about, like misogyny at boys' private schools. Second, he is a useful idiot to parrot the revisionist Indigenous history that is so popular in the left in Australia today. And the third, and the saddest reason, is sheer moral cowardice. These journalists are afraid of being called racists, and frankly, we need more people like you with the guts to have open and honest conversations on topics like this.
I might add a fourth, that if they admitted he was a fake, they might have to admit the Dark Emu's fake history too. But to our national security, Claire Chandler, because you've been very busy on that, I talked earlier in this show about the threat from China, right? Being asleep at the wheel. But you're also worried about another astonishing decision by this government. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, clearly a terrorist group, sponsors terrorist groups across the Middle East, but the Albanese government has changed its mind about listing it as a terrorist group here, as the United States has done, Sweden, for reasons it refuses now to explain. What's going on?
Well, you're entirely right, Andrew. We all recognise that the IRGC is a terrorist organisation and that it funds and supports and arms terrorist groups throughout the Middle East, including Hamas and Hezbollah. And 12 months ago, the Senate committee that I chaired recommended that the government list this group as a terrorist organisation. They've refused to do so. Now, what we know through Freedom of Information documents is that the government was intending on listing the IRGC as a terrorist organisation just prior to my committee handing down its final report. In the Senate, we've asked to see these documents several times now so that we can understand the reasonings why the government had for its backflip, which is frankly inexplicable, but if there are reasons, then we want to see them. And the government has so far refused. So this is just a complete lack of transparency, complete lack of accountability from the Albanese government, which frankly we shouldn't be surprised about anymore, but it is disgraceful that they are doing it on such an important issue of national security.
Has it at least explained why it won't explain?
No, not at all. They've said that legally it's not possible, and we in the coalition have offered bipartisan support to change whatever legislation needs to be changed to facilitate this listing. But beyond that, no further reason has been provided by the government. So again, if they would at least provide these documents to the Senate or even provide these documents to the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Security and Intelligence, we could understand their reasoning and perhaps, assist the government in coming up with a policy that will facilitate that listing.
This is extraordinary, but Will, to me it fits into a wider cultural background. There seems to be an unwillingness by this government to confront Islamism, whether it's Iran overseas, playing, footsie's even-handedness, the war between Hamas and Israel, or here, like confronting hate preachers, like this terrorism-backing Sydney cleric, Muslim cleric who described Jewish people as descendants of pigs and monkeys and now runs a Sunday school of all things. What's going on?
The old paradox of tolerance, Andrew. If you continue to tolerate the intolerant, intolerance will eventually dominate. There's a theme running through our conversation tonight, and it is cowardice. In this instance, it is cowardice both in a physical form of the threats of violence that come from Islamic extremism, and there is also the fear of being called a racist. In this instance, it's particularly stupid because Islam is a religious belief. A religious belief is something that you can choose to believe or not believe, and that means it should be open to legitimate scrutiny, as with any religion. But unfortunately, the left have very successfully conflated race and religion in this regard, and it's a very deliberate attempt to stifle any sort of conversation or open discussion, and it's something that we need to have more courage as a society to push back against.
Will, very well explained. Claire, astonishing figures just out. I mean, we have got an out-of-control immigration program. Melbourne's population last financial year went up by a record 166,000 people. That's almost a city in itself. Sydney's went up in 1 year by 143,000. I can't understand how this level of immigration has been tolerated and allowed by this government.
Well, I think the really concerning thing here, Andrew, is that immigration has increased in a way that is really not sustainable. And we're seeing that through all of the strains in the housing space, in terms of the infrastructure that we provide to our cities, so that, you know, to support their growing populations. So immigration is a good thing. It's wonderful when people decide to call this country home, but governments at all levels need to be prepared to have that level at a sustainable number so that we don't see these fall behinds in infrastructure and housing that we're currently seeing. And fundamentally, the buck has to stop with the federal government in that regard.
Yeah, but the question again, Will, and I suspect that we're going to have the same sort of answer because it seems a theme. The question is, why is it tolerated and not more widely criticised in the mainstream media? This level, this insane level of immigration that we clearly can't cope with.
Yeah, I think that, again, unfortunately, immigration and racism or cultural sensitivities have become mixed as a conversation in Australia. I'd also just point out, though, that this is a very easy way to cheat for growth for economies like Australia, like the UK and the US as well. We haven't really thought about productivity in the way we should in this country through things like lowering tax, through things like cutting red tape. And as a result, you can cheat top-line growth numbers by just boosting immigration. But unfortunately, people don't feel the top-line growth numbers in their local communities. They feel things like wages, they feel things like inflation, they feel things like access to services, and they're the things that get a huge amount of pressure put on them through these sorts of numbers. And that's why we need to have a really open and honest conversation about what is actually a sustainable immigration number for Australia.
Claire, can you squeeze out a 10-second answer about why Labor got just 28% of the vote in the state election in your state and forcing the Tasmanian Labor Party boss to quit?
Oh, look, I think it was a pretty poor campaign that was run by Labor locally in Tasmania. That's why they are on track to win only 10 or 11 seats in a 35-seat parliament. Well, and for the leader, Rebecca White, it's her third election defeat. So I think that's why she's calling it a day.
Bye-bye, Rebecca. That's it. Claire Chandler, Will Kingston, thanks to you both. That's it from me. Sherry is up next.